Growing up, I was always a person who thrived on structure and principles. I believed in maintaining integrity and setting clear boundaries. My parents had instilled in me the values of respect and accountability, and these became the foundation of how I navigated relationships. I carried those lessons into my adult life, always striving to be the steady anchor for those around me. When I met Amber, I was captivated by her charisma and beauty. She had a magnetic energy that pulled everyone into her orbit, including me. We married young, full of optimism and ambition, and built a life together that I thought would stand the test of time. Our relationship wasn't perfect, whose is, but I believed we were solid. Over the years, we faced the ups and downs of raising two daughters, managing careers, and balancing the chaos of family life. I was proud of the life we'd built and the values I'd worked to pass on to our children. Over time, history shows that revolutions often adopt the oppressive traits of the regimes they overthrow. This concept resonates profoundly, and while I never imagined myself as a tyrant, the perception of villainy is rarely self-recognized. Those who embody such roles often rationalize their behavior, excusing actions they would condemn in others. They uphold strict standards of honesty, fairness, and respect, but frequently fail to apply these to themselves. If they experience deceit or disrespect, they express outrage, yet they normalize the same behavior when it benefits them. I wasn't always seen as a villain. To most people around me, the idea of me being one would have seemed absurd. Yet my wife and daughters seemed to think differently, casting me in this role. In a baffling turn of events, my objections to dishonesty were reframed as oppressive. After this upheaval, my wife Amber assumed the position of authority in our household. Amber was strikingly beautiful, with dark skin and a tall, commanding presence. Her family claimed Native American heritage, though her features seemed more Mediterranean to me. My name is Cabrik North, an unusual choice by my parents. Everyone calls me Cuba. Together, Amber and I had two daughters, Daisy, 15, and Toby, 13. The first signs of my supposed tyranny emerged one Saturday night as we lay in bed. Amber had just worn herself out in a passionate moment and turned to me with her luminous brown eyes. She asked if she could join some colleagues at a lodge the following weekend for a scrapbooking retreat. I wasn't entirely thrilled, as I had hoped to take the girls to a spring training baseball game, but I hadn't mentioned it yet. Still, I agreed, encouraging her to enjoy herself. After all, she'd wanted to organize our family photos for some time. Amber returned from the weekend beaming with pride. She'd created 3 albums of family memories, artfully decorated with her own flair. She showed them to me, and I admired her work before moving on. Initially, this was a once-a-month activity. However, within 6 months, her scrapbooking weekends doubled, and after a year, they became weekly. I didn't think much of it until one day, Bianca, one of Amber's colleagues, stopped me at the grocery store. She casually asked why I never joined Amber for their outings. Surprised, I explained that scrapbooking wasn't my interest, and I had never been invited. Bianca gave me a curious look and clarified that their meetings mostly revolved around drinking and dancing, with scrapbooking being a rare activity. She mentioned her husband, Jeremy, often accompanied her and suggested I join as well. This revelation blindsided me. I had no clue Amber's weekends had evolved into social gatherings of a very different nature. I'd never checked her scrapbooks because I had no interest in them, so the truth went unnoticed. That evening I headed home, determined to confront Amber. When I arrived, Amber wasn't there, but Daisy approached me with a request. Her boyfriend had invited her to a concert. She'd previously only gone out with him in groups, and I was uneasy about a 15-year-old attending a concert alone with a 17-year-old. I repeated a long-standing rule: no solo dates until she was old enough to drive. Predictably, Daisy became furious, calling me a tyrant before storming off. For the first time, I began to see how I was being perceived within my family. Later that evening, Amber returned home, and I addressed the situation. I mentioned my conversation with Bianca and the surprise revelation about drinking and dancing. Amber flushed red, her demeanor shifting to defensiveness. She claimed she had intended to invite me, though the omission seemed suspicious. I sarcastically acknowledged how easily scrapbooking and partying might be confused. She countered that she wasn't obligated to inform me of every detail of her outings. Our conversation escalated as I questioned the secrecy of her activities. I noted that Bianca's husband accompanied her, which seemed to contrast sharply with Amber's insistence that it was a girl thing. Amber grew increasingly flustered as I pressed her about honesty, pointing out the discrepancies in her story. She accused me of being controlling, while I highlighted the lack of transparency in her actions. By the end of the argument, Amber stormed upstairs, clearly upset. I was left grappling with the realization of how much had shifted in our relationship. What began as innocent misunderstandings had grown into deep fissures of mistrust, leaving me questioning the dynamics of my role within our family. Dinner that night was thick with tension, as two members of the household had decided I was no longer worth speaking to. The silence was heavy, but I had no trouble sitting through awkward moments. Afterward, I settled in to watch a basketball game before heading upstairs. When I reached the bedroom, I found the door locked. Without hesitation, I retrieved the small, round key from above the frame, unlocked the door, replaced the key, and walked in. Amber was already in bed and immediately made it clear that I was not welcome. She insisted that I sleep on the couch, declaring that I wouldn't be allowed back into the bedroom for a long time. Ignoring her, I grabbed fresh clothes from my dresser and headed for the shower. When I finished, I returned to the bedroom and got into bed as usual. Her reaction was one of pure disbelief. It seemed she had assumed that locking me out would be enough to make me obediently retreat. Perhaps she had heard stories of men complying with such ultimatums, assuming it was a universal law that husbands automatically surrendered their place in bed when their wives decided so. But submission was not in my nature. I wasn't about to give up my own bedroom over an argument. Realizing I wouldn't budge, she stormed out, grabbing her pillow and a blanket, clearly intent on proving her point. I slept soundly that night while she struggled to find comfort elsewhere. By morning, she was already awake when I left for work. She looked exhausted, and it was clear the couch hadn't provided the restful sleep she had hoped for. When I returned home later that evening, I went upstairs to change and immediately noticed something was off. My belongings were gone. A quick glance around the house revealed that she had transformed the spare room, previously her so-called scrapbooking space, into a new sleeping area, now containing my clothes and a neatly arranged sofa bed. It was evident that she expected me to move in there permanently. That wasn't going to happen. Without hesitation, I began carrying my things back to the master bedroom. Halfway through, Amber noticed what I was doing and confronted me in the hallway, demanding to know why I was undoing her efforts. She stated that she had set up the spare room for me and that I would be sleeping there until I apologized. I made it clear that I had no intention of doing so and questioned whether this entire ordeal was her way of pushing for a divorce. Her expression shifted instantly, as if the thought had never crossed her mind, or at least as if she hadn't expected me to bring it up so directly. She protested, arguing that I was the one being unreasonable, and reminded me of the harsh words I had used against her. She emphasized that after 17 years of marriage, I had never spoken to her that way before. I pointed out that she had never given me a reason to before now. As the argument escalated, she insisted that she didn't want a divorce. What she wanted, she claimed, was for her husband to treat her with respect, not speak to her as if she were a misbehaving child. I countered that respect had to be earned and that deception, regardless of the technicalities, was not a trait that warranted it. The conversation turned toward Daisy's concert, with Amber suddenly shifting focus, questioning why I had forbidden our daughter from attending. I corrected her, clarifying that I had never outright said she couldn't go, only that she couldn't attend alone with her boyfriend. The rule had always been that she could go out with him as long as she was in a group. Amber had helped establish this rule, yet now she had unilaterally decided to change it. She admitted that she had gone ahead and told Daisy she could go. That was the final straw. I informed her that I would be speaking to a lawyer on Monday. She followed me downstairs shouting, but I had already checked out of the conversation. I turned on the game and ignored the ongoing outburst. Eventually, she stormed off, though I didn't care where she went. Later that night, Daisy walked past me with a smug, victorious expression, clearly satisfied with how things had played out in her favor. That would have to be addressed, but for the moment, I let it go. Meanwhile, Toby, having been informed of my apparent tyranny, had also decided I wasn't worth talking to. I was perfectly fine with the silence. The weekend was mine. On Saturday, I went fishing. On Sunday, I attended a boat show. At some point, Amber seemed to accept that her attempt at forcing me out had failed. She officially moved into the spare bedroom, leaving me to enjoy the extra space in bed. On Monday, I took the day off and met with my lawyer. Being a business owner allowed me that luxury. I instructed him to begin divorce proceedings, and he assured me the paperwork would be delivered by the following Monday. Before heading home, I also purchased a ticket to the very concert Daisy had used as her battleground for rebellion. By the end of the week, I had taken all the necessary steps to separate finances and prepare for the inevitable next phase of my life. For the first time in a long while, things were finally moving in the right direction. By Friday, the household divide was clear. Toby's orchestra had a concert, but since she still refused to acknowledge my existence, I decided to skip it entirely and go see a movie I had been wanting to watch. By the time I returned home around midnight, Amber still hadn't come back either. The girls had locked themselves away in their rooms, leaving me with nothing but my video games for company before I finally called it a night. The next evening, Daisy prepared to leave for another concert, the one I knew she had planned to attend with her boyfriend. I let her go ahead and followed about 10 minutes later, making sure to find them in the audience. I checked her ticket number and took a seat directly behind them. The music was what one might expect from a high school performance, but I came prepared. With my phone and headphones, I was entertained enough. When Daisy noticed me, she was visibly stunned, and the momentary shock quickly turned into seething resentment. I didn't acknowledge her reaction, but I certainly enjoyed it. At some point, she and her boyfriend decided to leave their seats, likely attempting to salvage the night. I followed, keeping just enough distance to remain within sight. I suspected their evening didn't turn out as enjoyable as they had hoped. Once the concert ended, I returned home to what I anticipated would be a hostile reception. The following morning, I wasn't surprised to find 3 angry women waiting for me in the kitchen, ready for confrontation. Fortunately, I had no need to go through that part of the house. Instead, I took the route through the laundry room and slipped into the garage, bypassing their setup entirely. Golf was on my schedule, and I had no intention of entertaining their theatrics. After finishing my round, I spent the rest of the day at a tool sale, and finally bought the impact wrench I had been eyeing for a while. When I arrived home, I could hear them reacting to my return, undoubtedly preparing for another attempt at cornering me. But before they could orchestrate anything, I had already locked myself in the bedroom, securing the door with a chair under the handle, just in case they had figured out how to use the backup key. The knocking and shouting started soon after, but my noise-canceling headphones proved to be the best investment I had ever made. Monday morning, I made sure to leave for work before anyone else was awake. By the time I returned at 4:30 in the afternoon, they were waiting, clearly set on making sure I didn't evade them this time. Instead of avoiding them, I casually grabbed a Mountain Dew and settled in the living room. They hovered around me like persistent gnats, but I paid them no mind. If they wanted a villain, I was happy to play the part. In their eyes, I had committed unforgivable sins. I had ruined Daisy's date, skipped Toby's concert, and deeply offended Amber. The way I saw it, everything was falling into place. My reign as the so-called tyrant was proceeding right on schedule. Just before 5, the doorbell rang. When I opened it, a delivery man stood before me, holding a set of legal documents. He had the look of someone you wouldn't want to cross. A shaved head, tattoos creeping from his collar, yet dressed in a sharply tailored suit. His demeanor was all business. He stepped inside and efficiently completed his job without a word beyond what was necessary. Amber introduced herself, and once the paperwork was in her hands, he departed, leaving behind a heavy silence. Amber tore open the envelope and visibly paled as she read its contents. She sank onto the uncomfortable couch, clearly shaken, while I leaned back in my chair, sipping my drink as if nothing unusual was happening. Toby, sensing something serious, asked what was wrong. She wanted to know who the man was and what he had delivered. Amber didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned to me with an expression that suggested she was seeing me in a completely different light for the first time. Then she finally voiced the realization that had just hit her. She understood now that I was filing for divorce. With measured calm, I reminded her of the situation she had created. There was, of course, the matter of the drinking and dancing that she had conveniently failed to mention. Then came the decision to move my belongings into the spare bedroom, the insistence that I sleep on the couch, and her unilateral decision to override my parenting when it came to Daisy's concert. Lastly, I let her know that I was fully aware of where she had been on Friday night. For years, they had all lived comfortably, never lacking anything. All I had ever asked in return was love and respect. Yet, despite everything I had provided, they had chosen to undermine me. It had become clear that they preferred to see me as the villain. So I decided to play the role to perfection. I made sure each of them understood the consequences. Daisy's dreams of getting the Camaro she had planned for her 16th birthday had just been derailed. Toby's expensive band camp, that was no longer in the budget. And as for Amber, I wished her luck with the mortgage, car payments, utilities, club memberships, and health insurance. All expenses she would now have to manage on her office manager's salary. Their faces reflected pure disbelief, as if they hadn't anticipated any of this. Amber, her voice hoarse, finally asked where I planned to go. I had my answer ready. Mexico seemed like the perfect choice. There, I could live like a king, complete with a chauffeur and a household staff. Perhaps I'd even meet a beautiful woman with a couple of kids who would actually appreciate me. Everything was already mapped out, and I had no doubts that life would be enjoyable. I wished them the best in finding happiness on their own terms. I stood up, retrieved my pre-packed suitcases, and carried them to the truck. It took 3 trips, but during the entire process, none of them spoke or even moved from their spots. They remained frozen, unable to fully process what was happening. That night, I checked into a room at the Hampton Inn. After settling in, I changed and headed down to the pool, swimming until exhaustion set in. When I felt rested enough, I spent some time in the jacuzzi before returning to my room. As I was drying off, my phone lit up with an alert. 3 missed calls, all from Amber. 1 voicemail. I played it back. Her tone was no longer one of anger or defiance. It was pleading. She wanted to talk. She insisted that the girls and she needed to sit down with me to try and work things out. She reminded me that I had said I loved them, and if that were still true, I should give them a chance to fix things. Now she was ready for a conversation. Maybe, just maybe, she was even willing to admit her deception. But this time it would happen on my terms. I sent her a simple reply. It's late. I spent the last 17 years here, and you had every opportunity to talk. Instead, you moved into the spare bedroom and made sure I knew my place. This time I took care of things myself. The phone started ringing almost immediately. I ignored it. Within minutes, 3 text messages arrived, one from each of them. Daisy and Toby pleaded for me to reconsider, asking me to give them a chance to talk things through. Amber, as expected, repeated the same tired refrain, insisting that everything could still be worked out if I just came home. Rather than engage in another back and forth, I sent a single reply. I would meet them for breakfast at Iggy's at 8 a.m. on Saturday. I knew they would hate it. Sleeping in until noon was their sacred Saturday ritual, and this would force them out of bed far earlier than they liked. If I was going to be cast as the villain, I had no problem embracing the role. They had found plenty of ways to inconvenience me over the last few weeks. It was time to return the favor. That week was consumed with work. Selling a business was no small feat, and the final stages required endless meetings and an avalanche of paperwork. Talbot Manufacturing had been pursuing a deal for years, and I finally signed over my company to them. The moment the transaction was complete, the money was transferred into my offshore account in Boca del Rio. The plan was real. I was going to Mexico. The language was no barrier. I spoke Spanish fluently, and I had connections there who assured me I would enjoy the lifestyle. More importantly, the fortune I had accumulated was securely mine, beyond Amber's reach. A proper tyrant always ensures his wealth stays in his own hands. By the time I arrived at the restaurant on Saturday morning, everything was in place. My bags were packed, and my plane ticket was tucked inside my jacket. The girls showed up about 10 minutes later, sliding into the booth. Amber beside me, Daisy and Toby across from us. My briefcase sat beside me, filled with everything necessary for what would likely be our final conversation. They were eager to talk right away, but I made them wait until we had ordered. Once the food arrived, the conversation began. Daisy spoke first, launching into an emotional speech about how difficult I had been lately. She accused me of being a control freak, claiming that my behavior had pushed her to lash out. But then she softened. She admitted that she respected me, appreciated everything I had done for them, and just wanted the freedom to make her own choices. Toby quickly echoed her sister's sentiments. She apologized for shutting me out, explaining that she and Daisy were growing up and needed more independence. Despite their frustrations, they still loved me. I acknowledged their apologies with a polite nod, but it was clear they weren't the ones who needed to answer for anything. Amber was next. Her words came carefully at first. She admitted that she should have been upfront about the so-called bachelorette parties. She dismissed them as harmless fun, claiming she never thought I would be interested in what they entailed. Her attempt at an apology was carefully measured, but I was done playing along. I told her it was too late. She looked confused, demanding to know what I meant. That's when I opened the briefcase and pulled out the photos. The images were sharp, crystal clear, undeniable evidence of what those so-called harmless nights had really been about. The photos showed Amber and 2 of her friends at a private gathering, caught in acts that shattered any illusion of innocence. For her, it may have seemed inconsequential, but unless she had the ability to guarantee that no consequences existed, medical or otherwise, it certainly wasn't harmless for me. I informed her that I had already been tested. The doctor confirmed that I was in the clear. Maybe she should consider doing the same, considering the people involved hadn't bothered with protection. Amber's face went pale as she processed what was in front of her. The girls leaned in, trying to see what had shocked her so badly. In a panic, she snatched up the photos and flipped them face down on the table. Confusion turned into desperation. She demanded to know how I'd gotten the photos. The answer didn't really matter, but I gave it anyway. When I told her I had hired a lawyer, I hadn't been bluffing. The lawyer had arranged for a private investigator who had followed her the previous Friday. That was all it took. The floodgates opened. She broke down sobbing, insisting that I was never meant to find out. She tried to frame it as nothing more than a brief indulgence, a moment of excitement she had convinced herself was necessary. She reminded me that she had never been with anyone else before when we married, and she hadn't wanted to go through life wondering what she had missed. This, she argued, was never supposed to affect us. It wasn't meant to hurt me. She begged me to believe that it had only happened once. Her logic was laughable. I pointed out the absurdity of her justification. Since when did ignorance prevent harm? If a person has blocked arteries but doesn't know it, does that stop a heart attack from happening? If someone has cancer but isn't diagnosed, does the disease suddenly cease to exist? Her actions had been a cancer, eating away at the foundation of our marriage. By the time the damage became apparent, it was already too late. She had claimed that she couldn't bear to live her life wondering what she had missed. Well, I had no intention of spending the rest of my life wondering what it would be like to enjoy my fortune without someone leeching off of it. Surely, by her logic, I had just as much right to chase my own fulfillment. Amber bolted from the restaurant, barely able to contain her sobs. Toby turned to me, stunned. She couldn't believe I'd gone through with it. I told her that her disbelief was the real disappointment. The truth, after all, is what sets people free. Daisy, still in shock, tried to find words but struggled to speak. When she finally managed, she accused me of being cruel. I reminded them that they didn't need to stay in the presence of someone so heartless. If I was as terrible as they believed, they were free to leave. And they did, rushing after their mother without another word. With that, I settled the bill and headed to the airport. An hour later, I was on a plane, leaving everything behind. Regret settled in somewhere over the clouds. I replayed everything in my mind, wondering if there had ever been a moment where this could have been avoided. I had been happy for 16 years. I had built a life, a family, a future I believed in. And now, all of it had crumbled. The weight of it sat heavy in my chest. And so, I did what I always did when things felt unbearable. I closed my eyes and took a nap. The flight had been long, and by the time I woke up, we were about an hour away from Heroica Veracruz. As I sat there staring out the window, my mind wandered back to everything I had left behind. Amber had sealed her own fate. She had made her choices and would now have to live with them. The girls, on the other hand, were just that. Girls. They had been swept up in the chaos, manipulated by their mother's version of events. Regardless, I would make sure they never went without anything. My lawyer was handling the financial arrangements, and if they ever wanted to see me, I would ensure it happened. If they didn't, well, they had their mother to rely on, for whatever that was worth. 6 months passed before I heard from Toby. My lawyer reached out first, letting me know she had been trying to contact me. When I called, Daisy was the one who answered. She didn't recognize my voice at first, but when I asked to speak to Toby, she hesitated before passing the phone over. The moment Toby heard my voice, she broke down. She apologized repeatedly, her words tumbling over each other as she tried to explain what had happened since I had left. Amber had spiraled. She drank constantly, surrounded herself with a revolving door of men and her so-called friends from work, and, according to Toby, was likely using something stronger than alcohol. For the first time, Toby admitted what she hadn't been willing to say before. Life had fallen apart since I had left. She acknowledged that she had let herself be convinced that I was the villain, that she had gone along with the narrative Amber spun. Now she could see how wrong she had been. She begged me to tell her that I still loved her, that I hadn't written her off completely. Of course, I still loved her. That was never in question. But there were limits to what I could do. Going back was out of the question. If I stepped foot near Amber, she'd probably have me arrested just for existing in her presence. Toby's response was immediate. She wanted to leave. She wanted to come to me. She barely saw her mother anymore, and when she did, the encounters were bitter and full of resentment. She insisted that Amber hated her, though I tried to reassure her that wasn't true. But then she explained why she felt that way. She had gotten a bad grade at school, and Amber had exploded. In the heat of the moment, Toby had snapped back, telling her mother she had no right to judge her after driving away the only good thing in their lives. The reaction had been swift. Amber, drunk or high, had slapped her across the face, called her a worthless brat, and made it clear she wasn't going to tolerate any backtalk. Toby sobbed through the phone, her voice raw as she admitted she had been so blind to the truth before. She had been manipulated, just like Daisy, into believing that I was the controlling tyrant in the household. She could see now how wrong that was, and pleaded with me to help her. I promised her I would figure something out. Minors couldn't travel internationally without parental consent, and Amber would never willingly allow her to come to me. But I wasn't about to let bureaucracy stand in the way. I gave Toby my direct number and told her to call me the next day. Then I reached out to my lawyer. Legally speaking, all she needed to leave the country was a valid passport and a signed letter of consent from me. The Mexican authorities wouldn't question it, and Amber wouldn't even need to know. I already knew she had a passport. We had traveled to France as a family the year before. I drafted the necessary documents, faxed them to my lawyer, and set the plan in motion. Toby was ready the next day. She told Amber and Daisy that she would be spending the weekend with a friend, took a taxi to the airport, and boarded her flight. I debated having my lawyer accompany her, but that would have made him an accomplice, and I didn't want to drag him into this any more than necessary. Besides, I knew Amber. If she found out, she would be vindictive enough to press charges against anyone involved. By the time Toby walked down the ramp at the airport, I was already there waiting for her. She spotted me instantly and ran across the pavement, tears streaming down her face as she threw herself into my arms. I lifted her off the ground, holding her tightly, feeling the weight of months of distance dissolve in that moment. She had changed. She was taller, her frame filling out with the beginnings of adulthood. She was stunning, her mother's dark skin and deep brown eyes only making her features more striking. But she was mine, too. And the way she looked at me with unfiltered emotion told me that she had finally realized what I had known all along. She had never lost me. She studied me, taking in the slight weight loss, the tan, the overall change in my demeanor. I had adapted to my new life, and it showed, but none of that mattered to her. She clung to me, whispering that she had missed me, that she had been so afraid I wouldn't want her back. That had never been in question. We walked to the car together, her hand in mine. When we arrived home, I showed her her new room, and she loved it. That night, we stayed up talking until nearly 2 a.m, catching up on everything we had missed. She told me about the mess her life had become, and I filled her in on what mine had turned into. When she admitted that she wanted to stay with me permanently, my chest tightened. For the first time in months, I felt like something had truly gone right. In Mexico, disappearing was easier. Amber had no way of knowing where I was, and as long as I stayed out of trouble, no one could force me to be found. Not that I thought she'd even try. Before we left, Toby had written her mother a letter explaining her decision. After that, silence. A full year passed before we heard anything from Amber or Daisy. During that time, Toby flourished. She adapted effortlessly, excelling in school and becoming fluent in Spanish. With her complexion, she blended in naturally, and for the first time, life felt peaceful. No drama, no tension. Then, out of nowhere, my lawyer emailed me. Daisy had reached out. She wanted to talk. To avoid any interference from Amber, I had my lawyer get her a prepaid phone. We scheduled a time when she could speak freely, and I called. She answered immediately, her voice thick with emotion. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her. When she finally calmed down enough to speak, she dropped a bombshell. She was pregnant. The sobs started again, but I let her get it all out. I wasn't angry, only protective. I knew how my father would have reacted, and I refused to be that kind of man. My daughter needed help, and I wasn't about to abandon her. I asked about her plans and whether Amber knew. Her response was bitter. Amber had dismissed her, called her an idiot, and offered no support. She revealed that her mother had refused to let her use birth control, and despite trying to be responsible, something had gone wrong. A broken protection, bad luck, she wasn't sure. The father had disappeared the moment he found out, leaving her completely alone. Worse, she learned she had no health insurance. Amber had never bothered to sign her up. At nearly 19, she was pregnant, abandoned, and overwhelmed. She felt like her life was over. I reassured her that it wasn't. It had just become more complicated. The real question was what she wanted to do. Her answer was immediate. She didn't want the baby. She refused to bring a child into the world with a man who had already run from his responsibility. More than anything, she wanted out. She had seen how Toby had found a new life with me, and she desperately wanted the same chance. Through her tears, she begged me to take her in, to forgive her, to let her start over. Of course, I said yes. She had always been my daughter. Nothing could change that. When I told Toby, she wasn't happy. Things had been peaceful, and she feared Daisy's arrival would ruin that. But as we talked, something shifted in her expression, recognition. She realized Daisy was making the same mistakes she had once made, and just like I'd forgiven Toby, it was only right to give Daisy that chance too. Daisy's return followed the same steps as Toby's. I arranged everything, ensured she could leave without interference, and met her at the airport. The reunion was emotional. The sisters spent hours talking, untangling the damage of the past year. She didn't look pregnant, which I asked about, and she confirmed she was only 6 weeks along. She was firm in her decision. She wanted a pregnancy termination. In Mexico, that wasn't an option, so I arranged for a clinic in Houston. We flew there, took care of it, and were back within a week. Personally, I had always been against pregnancy termination, but this wasn't my decision to make. If ever a choice belonged solely to a woman, it was this one. Had she been further along, I might have struggled with it more. But at that moment, my only role was to support her. A week later, Daisy was herself again, lighter, freer, like the girl I had always known. She was the complete opposite of Toby in every way. Where Toby had inherited her mother's dark features, Daisy had my family's blonde hair and a taller, more delicate build. They were night and day in both appearance and personality, yet they had always been inseparable as children. Within days, they settled back into the dynamic they had once shared, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had both of my daughters back. My reign as the so-called tyrant had officially ended. Not that it had ever truly bothered me. The title had only ever been a projection of Amber's own resentment, an illusion designed to justify her choices. And now, she had inherited the role herself. The girls saw her for what she truly was, and she was left to navigate the wreckage of her decisions alone. The revolution had ended. Not long after, my lawyer informed me that Amber had started harassing him. She wanted to know everything: where the girls were, where I had gone, what my intentions were regarding the divorce. She also made it clear that she was selling the house before she lost it. I felt nothing. There was no anger left, no satisfaction in knowing she was struggling. I didn't care about the house or the money. I had enough, and I had no interest in punishing her. Some battles are simply no longer worth fighting. There comes a point in life when exhaustion replaces resentment, when the desire to move forward outweighs the need for revenge. I had reached that point. Amber could do whatever she wanted. I was done looking back. Amber wanted to reconnect with me, with the girls, with the past she had shattered. Despite everything, I never doubted she had once loved our daughters. Whether that love still existed in its pure form or had been warped by years of manipulation, I wasn't sure. Now that they were no longer tools she could use to hurt me, I hoped they might find a way to rebuild something with her. At first, the girls had no interest in speaking to her. They ignored her letters, which my lawyer forwarded to us, and refused to acknowledge her attempts to reach out. She wrote to me as well, but I tossed every letter straight into the trash. I fought the urge to dig them back out, knowing that reading them would only lead to self-inflicted torment. It took 4 letters before I finally admitted to myself that I was spiraling, and I instructed the girls to handle all future mail, disposing of anything from Amber without telling me. Life had been good. I had my daughters, and they were thriving. They showed me more love than ever, took care of me in small ways, and made it clear that they valued my presence. I dated casually, even had a few steady arrangements, and felt content for the first time in years. But Amber didn't stop. The letters kept coming. First monthly, then weekly, until she wore them down. Eventually, they sat me down for a conversation. They had made a decision. They wanted to call her. I had no objections. Whatever relationship they chose to have with their mother was entirely up to them. But they wanted me to listen in, to be there as a silent observer. I had no interest in hearing Amber's voice again, but they begged, insisting it was just this once, to ensure she wasn't trying to manipulate them through some backdoor legal scheme. Reluctantly, I agreed, on the condition that they never asked me to do it again. The call was set for Thursday evening. They blocked the number so Amber couldn't trace it and put the phone on speaker. Surprisingly, they seemed comfortable talking to her. which meant her letters must have done some damage control. She apologized profusely, explaining that she had spent time in rehab and therapy. I hadn't known that, but I supposed I would have if I had ever read her letters. Then came the real request. She wanted to see them. She begged them to visit. Toby shut her down immediately. She wasn't willing to take that risk. Amber pressed, desperate, but Daisy backed her sister up. They didn't trust her. They feared she might manipulate them, try to force them to stay, or do something drastic. When Amber broke down in sobs, neither of them wavered. She admitted she deserved their doubt. She blamed herself entirely, acknowledging the destruction she had caused. It pained her to hear their distrust, but she accepted that she had earned it. If they wouldn't come to her, she asked if she could come to them. She just wanted to see them. Just once. Toby didn't hesitate. No. She reminded Amber that she had made her choice long ago. The damage had already been done. They didn't want her to know where they were. They didn't trust her. The conversation should have ended there, but Amber kept pleading, insisting she had changed. She claimed she would do anything, sign any paper, make any promise, if it meant they would just give her one chance. I grabbed a notepad, scribbled a message, and passed it to Daisy. Tell her to sign the divorce papers. Give me full custody and give up any financial claims. Daisy read it, nodded, and showed it to Toby, who agreed. Then she relayed the terms. To my surprise, Amber accepted immediately. She admitted she needed time to save enough for travel, but if the house sold before foreclosure, she could come sooner. She promised to sign the paperwork immediately, finalizing the divorce in 60 days. Then, cautiously, she asked how I was doing. Toby shook her head, keeping her response curt. I was fine, and they weren't allowed to talk about me with her. Amber hesitated, then asked them to pass along a message. She had written to me, but didn't know if I had read any of it. She wanted me to know she was sorry, that she still loved me, that she would do anything to make things right. Daisy's response was blunt. She doubted I wanted to hear anything from her. Then, as if some old part of her had briefly resurfaced, Daisy let her guard down and said something she immediately regretted. Something about how different things could have been if Amber had changed her mind before throwing everything away. On the other end of the call, Amber screamed. Daisy flinched, instantly backtracking, apologizing in a way that felt forced. The tension was thick. To diffuse it, she quickly set boundaries, agreeing that they would call on the second and fourth Friday of each month at 6 in the evening. That was the most she was willing to offer. Amber, her voice trembling, accepted. She told them it meant the world to her, that she was working on rebuilding her life, trying to move forward. She had a new job now, something about cable television. But none of it mattered. For the first time, Amber wasn't in control of the narrative. She had lost the power she once held over them. They set the terms. They dictated how and when she could be part of their lives. And for someone who had spent years manipulating every situation to her advantage, that must have been unbearable. The conversation dragged on, meaningless and dull. I stopped listening as they exchanged updates for over an hour. When they were finally done, the girls came to my side, hugging me tightly. They had grown so much, and I couldn't quite grasp how time had slipped away. It felt good, being free from the weight of control, no longer playing the role of a tyrant. Now I could simply be their father, take them to dinner, and enjoy a quiet evening on the beach. Amber planned to visit in 6 months, but I refused to let her near our home. The girls suggested Heroica Veracruz, but even that felt too close. Tampico was the compromise. We drove along the coast, laughing like old times. Well, the girls did. I might have laughed once, but it didn't feel right for a man my age, so I stopped. We rented a beachfront apartment, unsure of what to expect from her arrival. I had no intention of leaving the girls alone with her, let alone sharing a space. But there was no other choice. When she finally arrived, I stayed outside, sunbathing on the balcony, while they talked behind closed doors for hours. It wasn't my concern. When she stepped out, she leaned against the railing, watching me. She expected words, but I had nothing left to say. She spoke about punishment, about forgiveness, about the past. She tried to remind me of who she once was, the woman I had fallen for, the one I had married. But that woman no longer existed. She had destroyed her. Tears streaked her face as she insisted that the girls had forgiven her and questioned why I couldn't do the same. But it wasn't that simple. She had lied, betrayed, and kept deceiving me until the truth became undeniable. And when I finally confronted her, she had painted me as the villain, turning the girls against me while she indulged in her own selfish escape. Even now, she still expected something from me. some form of absolution that I couldn't give. She mentioned letters I had never read, claiming she had changed, that she wanted to be in my life again, not as a wife, but as something, anything. A co-parent, a friend, maybe more. She just wanted to be near the girls, near me. But trust had long since died, and I knew better than to believe in her promises. She had sold the house, taken the money, and decided to stay. If I tried to push her away, she said she wouldn't leave, but I made one thing clear. If she interfered in our lives, I would disappear, and she would never see us again. Still, she begged for a chance. Not for romance, not even for redemption, just a role in the girls' lives. She admitted her mistakes, her regrets, and asked for a shred of mercy. But I felt nothing. Amber had no real answer, just a vague excuse about falling in with the wrong people. She convinced herself that none of it mattered, that she still loved me, that her actions wouldn't affect us. Looking back, she couldn't understand why she had believed those lies. Alcohol, substances, recklessness, it had all spiraled out of control. She asked me what, exactly, I couldn't forgive. The drinking, the pills, the infidelity. None of that was the real problem. It was the deception. If she had been honest, if she had told me she was restless, that she wanted more excitement, even that she wanted to be with other people, I might have struggled with it, but at least I would have known the truth. Instead, she had lied. Worse, she had turned me into the villain, pushing me out of my own home, making me the problem. I had only ever loved her and the girls, yet she had disrespected me in every way possible. Tears streamed down her face. She whispered apologies, saying she had been scared and desperate, that she should have talked to me instead of destroying everything. She looked lost, broken. Even tyrants can show mercy sometimes. I pulled her into an embrace, letting her cry into my chest. She hadn't lost everything. The girls still wanted her in their lives, and as much as I resented what she had done, I wanted them to have their mother. I told her I would try to forgive, at least enough for us to co-parent. We wouldn't be together again, but maybe if she stayed on the right path, we could find some kind of friendship. She wanted to stay, to move closer if I allowed it. I told her we'd see how the weekend went. If things went well, she could come home with us and stay until she found her own place. She promised to be good, to make it work. And she tried. The girls were thrilled. We spent days exploring Tampico, laughing and reconnecting. Amber stayed out late but always returned in the morning, just in time for breakfast and another day together. By Monday, she arrived at our place with a dozen bags, stuffing them into the back of our Escalade. On the drive home, we sang and joked, the girls helping Amber with her Spanish. She wasn't fluent, but she had picked up enough from being with me to get by. We had a rule: English at home, Spanish outside, and while it was tough for her at first, she adapted quickly. 3 days later, she asked me to help her find an apartment. It wasn't easy. As a foreigner, it was safer to live in areas with other expats where crime and police attention were more predictable. We spent weeks searching. The girls asked if she could stay with us permanently, but I shut that idea down immediately. They didn't argue. By her 4th week, she had settled in. That night, after the girls went to bed, I stayed up at the computer, mindlessly scrolling when I felt someone behind me. 2 familiar arms wrapped around my neck, the scent unmistakable. Soft warmth pressed against my back, her bare skin, her body leaning into me. She whispered a teasing remark about what I was watching, but I barely processed it. Turning in my chair, I froze. She wore one of my old shirts, knotted at her waist, lacy pink underwear beneath. No bra. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. Amber had always been breathtaking, and she knew exactly what she was doing. And I knew exactly what she wanted. Amber moved closer, cupping my face in her hands. She insisted there were no games this time, just raw desire. She hadn't been with anyone in a long time, and she knew I hadn't either. There was no reason to resist. We weren't married, and nothing was stopping us. She wanted me, and she knew I wanted her. She promised to make it worth my while. I hesitated, calling it baggage, but she dismissed the idea. To her, it was simple. Just 2 people with history, mutual attraction, and an undeniable need. She let her shirt fall open, revealing exactly what she was offering. It had been too long, and she knew she had me. I carried her to my bedroom, and we gave in. It felt like something I had been starving for, and she must have felt the same. After, she curled into me, whispering that she wanted more. Often. She wasn't trying to trap me, she swore. No plans, no strings. Just something between us. I reminded her that we had agreed on no expectations, just clarity. She panicked for a moment, desperate for me to believe that she wasn't trying to manipulate the situation. She just needed me. I reassured her. We were just talking, making sure we weren't slipping into old illusions. She accepted it, admitting she wanted more, but understood it was impossible. If we could at least be friends, that would be enough. Friends who shared this when they needed it. I warned her not to hold on to false hope. She was beautiful, the best lover I'd ever had, but I couldn't see a future with her. No matter how much she swore she had changed, I had already fallen for that woman once, and she had destroyed everything. I would always be waiting for her to do it again. I wasn't willing to risk rebuilding my life just to watch it collapse. We both needed to move forward, not live in the past. She understood. She regretted everything, but knew we couldn't undo it. Still, we could be lifelong friends, co-parents. And until we found something real with someone else, we could have this. I agreed, but reminded her that the girls couldn't know. They wouldn't approve, and if they thought she was manipulating me, it would only push them away. She asked to stay the night. We set an early alarm, and before dawn, she kissed me deeply before slipping out of my room. For 2 weeks, she came to me after the girls were asleep, our chemistry as intense as ever. When she moved into her own place, nothing changed. She kept coming back, at least twice a week. She started a moped rental business, catering to tourists, and it thrived. The girls worked for her after school, and on weekends, their relationship slowly healing. They told me she occasionally went on dates with American tourists, though it didn't seem serious. The first night she stayed over after I learned about her dating. I reached for a protection. She stopped me, confused. I explained that I was being careful, given her new social life. She laughed, assuring me she hadn't slept with anyone else. If she ever did, she'd let me know. She had learned her lesson the hard way. After I left, she had caught something and had to see a doctor. From then on, if she ever was with someone new, protection would be mandatory. She asked if I had been with anyone. I told her no. She satisfied me too much to bother looking, and besides, I wasn't the type to sleep around. I needed a real connection, and so far no one compared to her. She smiled, admitting she felt the same. No one matched me as a lover. She had been reckless before, but she wasn't making that mistake again. Then she pushed the protection away and pulled me closer. I didn't argue. A year after Amber moved out, I met Drusilla Consuela Chabala Rios. Daisy wanted a horse, and Drusilla was a breeder. Her Andalusians were stunning, black with long, flowing manes. She was just as striking, tall, curvy, and effortlessly elegant, with glossy black hair like the horses she raised. Our first meetings were about horses, but she quickly charmed the girls, and they adored her in return. We met for lunch twice, once at a restaurant, then at her estate when we finalized the purchase. Her English carried a lilting accent, and everything about her, her home, the immaculate stables, the way she carried herself was refined yet warm. I had no interest in horses, but Daisy did, and I cared about Daisy. And soon I found myself caring about Drusilla, too. When I asked her to dinner and dancing, I didn't expect her to say yes, but she did. She wasn't wearing a wedding ring, but the faint indentation on her finger told a story. Over dinner, we traded pasts. She spoke of an ex who never gave up his playboy ways, and I told her about Amber. Her husband had been a fool. Any man who wasn't satisfied with a woman like her had to be dead inside. Just watching her, listening to her talk, stirred something in me. After dinner, she took me to her club, and we danced. She was incredible, graceful, magnetic. Holding her in my arms, breathing her in, feeling the warmth of her body against mine. It was intoxicating. When she pressed against me, teasing but deliberate, it was one of the most erotic moments I had ever experienced. Her dress dipped low, revealing a red lace bra beneath, and when we stepped outside, she kissed me so fiercely that it left me breathless. She wanted to see me again, and I had no intention of saying no. For 2 months, we went on dates a few times a week. Then she invited me to a picnic on her property. We walked to a secluded spot by the river, spreading a blanket beneath the willows. She leaned back against me, fitting into my arms as if she belonged there. And we talked for hours. As the sun dipped lower, she tilted her head to look at me, her deep brown eyes holding mine. She kissed me first, her lips soft and deliberate. Then, in a whisper, she made it clear what she wanted. Right there, beneath the trees, we made love. Afterward, we lay in the fading light, her body warm against mine. Eventually, we dressed and made our way back to the house. Before I could leave, she asked me to stay the night. I laughed, saying we had to let the girls know. She grinned and sent them a message, her phone buzzing almost instantly with responses. "They want pictures," she laughed. We fell into bed again, and I thought I was spent for the night until she convinced me otherwise. The next morning, she made me breakfast, her eyes watching me with something deeper. And then she asked the question, "Do you love me?" I nearly choked on my juice, making her laugh. I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. Yes, I loved her. It had only been a few months, but she was everything: smart, independent, passionate. But my life was complicated. My daughters came first. She understood, nodding without hesitation. Love for a woman like her was one thing, but love for one's children was another. That was how it should be. Then came the harder part: Amber. We weren't together, but we were co-parents. There was history, baggage. Before Drusilla and I had even started dating, Amber and I had slipped once, but not since. Still, I needed to be upfront about my past, about what Amber's presence meant. Drusilla listened, watching me carefully. Then she asked the one thing I hadn't fully admitted to myself. "Do you still love her?" I exhaled. Probably in some way. Not the same way I once had, not romantically, but we had shared too much life for those feelings to disappear completely. She had changed, returned to the woman I had once married, and I didn't want to see her fall apart again. Drusilla said nothing for a long moment, but something in her expression softened. When she finally walked me to my car, she kissed me so deeply that my head spun. Driving home, I felt lighter than I had in years. The moment I stepped inside, the girls practically tackled me. "This is amazing!" Daisy beamed, squeezing me tightly. Toby grinned beside her, nodding in agreement. I wasn't sure what they had been texting with Drusilla, but whatever it was, they clearly approved. From that moment on, it felt like my wedding was inevitable. My daughters, my ex-wife, and my girlfriend were all in on it, conspiring behind my back. But before I could even process what was happening, I had to face an uncomfortable meeting with Amber. I had dreaded this conversation, but to my surprise, my fears were completely unfounded. 2 days later, she burst through the door, throwing her arms around me, kissing my cheek, practically vibrating with excitement. I was caught off guard, unsure what was happening. She gushed about Drusilla, saying she had met her and absolutely loved her. She called her perfect for me, which, coming from Amber, was nothing short of shocking. But it also gave her the courage to finally admit something she had been avoiding. She had met someone too. His name was Maxime, a French expat. I called him Max, and he didn't seem to mind. He was easygoing, friendly, and completely devoted to Amber. The girls didn't exactly embrace him, but they tolerated him with mild amusement, and he took it in stride. He wasn't particularly inspiring, but for Amber, he seemed just right. She adored Drusilla, and Max was utterly mesmerized by her. But while Amber was falling for Max, she and the girls were laser-focused on another mission: getting me married as quickly as possible. Before I even knew what was happening, I was being dragged to a jewelry store to pick out a ring. I had no memory of proposing, but somehow a June wedding was officially on the calendar. When the day arrived, Drusilla was breathtaking, my daughters were radiant, and Amber orchestrated the entire event with suspicious efficiency. After the ceremony, we were whisked away in a limousine to the airport. Max had arranged for us to honeymoon in France, at his house in Nice. I had no doubt it would be an unforgettable adventure. Drusilla was everything: passionate, fiery. But as I boarded that plane, I realized something else. There was a new tyrant in my life, and I was perfectly happy to surrender.